It's when we go at loggerheads with one another and we decide that someone has to be right. And as we know in relationships, that's not always the truth. There's not always a right and a wrong. There might be two rights, two truths in a relationship. Hell, there might be three or four. Hello, and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today is going to be a great day. We are well into 2022, my friends, and I don't know how you're doing, but it has been a steep learning curve for me in the past couple of weeks. And what's really interesting is the challenges that I've been noticing in relationships. Today, we're talking about how relationship challenges are a mirror, how your relationships in your life can serve as a mirror. And I mean that in all respects, from personal, private, family relationships to intimate partners and lovers, husbands and wives relationships, and also those in the workplace with other colleagues, with your partners or associates, or even with patients, clients. And it is fascinating to me how much we can learn from one another just when we reflect on those relationships. So that's what we're talking about in today's episode. And a big part of what we're going to be talking about is actually implementing a really cool tool of curiosity. Now, over the past year, actually more than that, year and a half now, I've been interviewing experts from all different fields and really people who've had some incredible insight in terms of business, health and happiness, relationships, and personal growth. And one of the most fascinating commonalities that I've noticed is this concept of using the power of curiosity. And actually, we're going to interplay curiosity today when we talk about how relationships can serve as mirrors. But I welcome you to join me over on the Business of Happiness Hive. It's a private Facebook group. Why? Because at the end of February, I will be having a private, to all my private Facebook group members, webinar solely based on curiosity and how curiosity can take your relationship to the next level, your business to the next level, your personal development to the next level. It's as simple as staying curious. So if you're curious, pardon the pun, I know, it's punchy. I'm a little punchy today. But if you are curious about this webinar, I highly recommend it. It's made a huge difference in my life. I'd say second to gratitude in terms of impact on my personal happiness has been implementing this superpower of curiosity. So join me in February on the Business of Happiness Hive. You have to request to be a member of the private Facebook group before you'll have the link to the webinar, but it's free. It's my honor to bring this to you. I'd love to just stimulate the conversation. Join us and find other people in the community who are like-minded and create more of a network with people who you aspire to, converse with and to see the same values in. So the Business of Happiness Hive on Facebook is where you'll find it. Come on over and find me there. Now, when we're talking about relationships as a mirror, this came very intensely to me this past week. Over the Christmas holidays, we spent a lot of time with our families, our very immediate family, those of us who were lucky enough to do so. And one of the greatest teachers in my life has always been and continues to be my children. And my oldest two are now teenagers, and teenage years bring on their own challenges. And my middle son and I have had some challenging conversations. And I realized what a gift this relationship is. I don't know why, but my son and I tend to always be at loggerheads about something, always opposite ends of the conversation, opposite ends of opinion. And sometimes it can get emotionally charged. And, I realized one evening when we were having a conversation, and man, I was firing back very quickly. We were stepping on each other's toes, barely letting each other finish the conversation. And I thought, why am I doing this? I don't do this with a lot of other people. I'm usually very patient to hear someone out. And I had this epiphany that in this relationship was a mirror of something that I just haven't healed yet inside myself. I thought, wow, what if we can look at every challenge that way? It reminded me of a conversation I had actually with a patient several years ago in my practice, where it wasn't actually the patient, it was their parent. And the parent had a lot of miscommunication in the family. It was a divorced family, and so mom would get one half of the story and dad would get the other half of the story. There was a lot of fear and insecurity about what was actually happening with his daughter's care. And very quickly, he became aggressive and confrontational. And I felt that same feeling I felt the other evening when I was talking to my son. And I realized both of these incidents were a great mirror into something that I was not yet fully healed from. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? Here I thought that I had this already taken care of. Here I thought that I'd already overcome this. And what I recognized in the moment was an insecurity. An insecurity. And when I was able in both situations to take on accountability and humility and understanding, it diffused the situation immediately. It's when we go at loggerheads with one another and we decide that someone has to be right. And as we know in relationships, that's not always the truth. There's not always a right and a wrong. There might be two rights, two truths in a relationship. Hell, there might be three or four. And we seem to be so intent on being right that sometimes we can sacrifice the betterment of the relationship. And of course, that's not the ultimate goal. So, in relationships, if we looked at them as mirrors, rather, now, it doesn't mean that you're responsible for somebody else's actions. Not at all. In fact, how could you ever be? But you are responsible for your own. And when you notice that immediate trigger, it's that split-second emotional charge. It's that limbic system being attacked immediately. And, when your emotions take charge of you, it's very difficult to analyze your next step. That's how addictions happen. That's how, one of the reasons why for so long, when the minute I walked in the door, I'd just walk straight to the pantry and start eating, because I had this emotional overwhelm and exhaustion from the end of the day. Well, the same is true in relationships. We get to a place where something is triggered that hits an emotional spark that just turns us into complete animals, where we just dig into that fight or flight behavior. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know. What's so fascinating is if you can take a moment the minute you feel that fight or flight instinct come into play, the minute you feel the heightened awareness and increased heart rate and a little bit more emotion, like an adrenaline rush, you almost feel a little bit high, kind of like a sugar rush almost. You realize, wait a minute, something's tapped into that limbic system of mine that's saying fight, 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 or run, run, run. And somewhere, somehow, my greater, more intelligent mind is being hijacked, in the words of my friend Prepo Topletsky, that our thought processes are being hijacked by our emotions. They were just triggered, and now we're beginning to get hijacked from making the next best choice in terms of words or actions. And so the powerful, powerful place to be in that moment is to take a deep breath. Just take a deep cleansing breath. And, I have to admit, I didn't do that in this conversation with my son. But now looking back on the conversation, I can see that would have been so much more calming, so much more honest and humble to be able to just slow myself down and get outside of that immediate reactive response and face it with a more intelligent, more emotionally evolved place. Because the follow-up question then becomes, do you want to be right or do you want to have a relationship? What is it that you want out of this situation? And the same is true in terms of business relationships. What do you really want out of this? Do you want a collaborative relationship or do you want to be right? And is there something in this relationship that's triggering an insecurity or fear? And that's where the mirror comes into place. Is there something there that's just shining a light of something that you're insecure about or something you feel like you need to defend? And asking yourself that question, wow, why did that affect me so deeply? What is it I'm trying to stand up for? What is it I'm trying to mask? The truth is, we're all human beings. We're all just learning how to do this. The truth is that nobody is fully evolved. Nobody's going to get it right the first time. And so really, there's enormous beauty in these relationships that bring up these little tiny issues we need to clean up within ourselves. And really, that's what a relationship does so beautifully. It's a great insight into something that we still need to heal or still need to resolve. So the lesson here is there's always insight in uncomfortable conversation. Where there's challenge in relationships, there's potential breakthrough. Imagine if we could be so evolved as moms, as business leaders, as partners, that when we felt that discomfort, when we felt that challenge and that fear build up and that resistance build up, imagine if you would be able to step back and see it for what it truly is, as a learning opportunity, as an opportunity for further growth. That's, to me, one of the most beautiful parts about relationships, because when we look back over them, when we can get ourselves outside of the emotional triggers and we look back over the histories of our relationships, we see that there are so many opportunities for us to see ourselves more clearly in the eyes of someone else. And that really the big, most important, most powerful message is that we're all human beings who are very fallible, who all have triggers. And so perhaps that person you were talking to had a trigger that you stepped on unknowingly. And so having that compassion for one another gives us the opportunity to see each other in a greater light as well. Since that conversation with my son, I did, in a new setting outside of that emotionally charged conversation, pull him aside and say, I just want to let you know I'm so grateful to you for being vulnerable enough to have that conversation with me. And it's difficult to share our emotions. And it's difficult to say things that, the other person is not going to receive so easily. And how can we sit down and do this again in a way that we're not attacking one another? Because shutting down after a conversation, even when it was uncomfortable, is the least effective thing we can do in terms of creating a growth mindset relationship. But really having that humility and that accountability for our actions, it diffuses it completely. And the same thing had happened with my relationship with that patient's father. Immediately, I saw where the problem was. I could see that the communication had not been exemplary. Were we right? Was I right? Was he wrong? I don't know. But in that moment, he just needed to be heard. And what I needed to do was put down my porcupine quills and allow him to speak, allow him to be heard. And then we could move forward from there. If I needed to, take some accountability for my actions, but not ever having to lie down in defeat. Just because somebody is angry or upset doesn't mean you necessarily did anything wrong. It just means they need to be heard. It just means that there's some emotional charge there. And if you're feeling the reflection of it, it's a great opportunity for you to ask yourself, wow, what is this inciting in me? Because if you didn't have that emotional response, you wouldn't have anything that you needed to hide or work on. If you were able to stay completely calm in the moment, then you'd know that there's nothing that it's reflecting inside of you. This is just somebody else having a really bad day, and you can still be there for him. So that's my message to you today, is how relationships, one example of how relationships can be amazing, amazing mirrors for us in all aspects of our lives. And the power of recognizing that in the moment. And it's a learned practice. It's not something we get down immediately or a skill that we just instill just like that. It's something that we really have to practice. But having the awareness of it and being able to see it as a little indicator of something that we need to work on still within ourselves can completely pull you out of that emotional defensive action. Well, my friends, wishing you a spectacular day. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business of Happiness podcast. I wish for all of us that we could see our relationships in that light and that we could learn from them, because that really is the purpose. One of the greatest purposes of this life is that we can get to know ourselves better and get to know others better. And in doing so, get to know all of humanity. Thank you again for joining me today. Don't forget to check out the Business of Happiness Hive so that you can get to know more people in this community and we can share like-minded stories and support one another. And until I speak to you again next time, remember, when you feel good, that's when you can do good. Bye-bye.